Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Women's Imaging MinnieCast, brought to you by antmini.com. I'm your host, Amerigo Allegretto, and today we're going to shed some light on molecular breast imaging, or MBI for short. My guest today is Ria Dave, a fifth-year student in the BA-MD program at the University of Missouri, Kansas City. She's also a pre-doctoral research trainee at Washington University in St. Louis. Dave and colleagues recently led research published in the journal Clinical Imaging, which highlighted trends in how often MBI is used. They found that MBI in general remains underused, even as the modality offers advantages over other supplemental imaging techniques. The trends include an over 30% reduction in utilization between 2017 and 2022, with younger women avoiding MBI more often than older women. Ria and I dive into potential barriers tied to these trends, including concerns about radiation dose, lack of physical availability, and longer acquisition times, among others. Ria also shares what she wants to work on after she earns her degree, including addressing health disparities while working in breast imaging and following in the footsteps of a previous guest on this podcast series. We thank you, the audience, for your continued support and hope you can take something back to your practice. Enjoy the show. So first of all, let's talk about your time at UMKC.
So I am a medical student in the six-year BA-MD program at UMKC, or University of Missouri, Kansas City. It's an accelerated med program where you enter straight through high school, and then you finish your undergraduate degree in 2 years, and then you move directly into medical school. So right now I am a year 5 out of 6 in the program, which essentially is equivalent to being a third-year medical student. And so I'm basically done with all my clinical rotations at this point. Alongside medical school, I'm currently at Washington University in St. Louis as a year-long NIH TL1 predoctoral research trainee.
Oh, wow.
And so I'm like taking a gap between medical school and finishing medical school. I'm working with Dr. Michelle Lee in the breast imaging department, which is where the study came from, and where most of my research focus is on breast imaging, access to care, and health equity. As part of my training, I'm also working towards a Master of Science in Clinical Investigation, which has been a great way to build my skills in translational research and outcomes-focused work along my clinical training.
Okay, and are you interested in a career in breast imaging or perhaps a particular specialty within the field?
Yes, I am very interested in a career in breast imaging. I was first drawn to the specialty because it kind of uniquely sits at the intersection of clinical care, public health, and advocacy. To me, I love being in the reading room and interpreting studies and collaborating with all the other radiologists, but also being that first point of contact a patient has with the cancer care system, and the moment like that can shape outcomes, trust, and access to care. Breast imaging has felt like a specialty for me where I can directly access or address health disparities while still building long-term relationships with patients. Within the specialty, I'm really interested in working with improving access to preventative screenings, such as mammography, for populations that are consistently underserved, especially incarcerated women and women who face structural barriers like lack of insurance, transportation, and continuity. For example, one of my biggest projects that I've been working on as a research trainee has been working with the Clayton County Jail here in St. Louis and implementing a mammography screening program in the jail. So my research and advocacy work have really shown me that, yes, early detection through widespread mammography screening can reduce breast screening mortality by almost 40% in the United States. However, there are so many systemic level barriers that have led to healthcare being inaccessible. So long term, I would love to practice clinically while also being involved in program development, mentorship, policy, and quality improvement. Be really cool to design outreach screening programs, evaluate screening rates, and work with institutions and policymakers to close gaps in care. One of my mentors from UMKC, Dr. Amy Patel, who's a breast radiologist at Liberty Hospital, she's worked with to pass a lot of bills in the state of Missouri to ensure mammography screening is covered by private insurers, and I would love to follow her steps one day. Breast imaging and overall just feels like a place where I can combine, again, patient-centered medicine that we learned so much about in medical school with a meaningful impact that I can see upstream.
We actually had Dr. Patel as our very first guest for this podcast series.
That's really cool. I'm going to have to let her know that.
Yes, do tell her I said hello.
Yes.
So let's talk about this study that you and colleagues led that examined trends in molecular breast imaging. What led to you undertaking that study?
Yes, so the study really grew organically out of our work from our senior author, Dr. Michelle Lee. She was already using the Meredith Market Scan commercial database that we use with the MBI paper,
Mhm.
which has de identified medical claims from people that are on employee based or sponsored health plans. So she actually started by measuring utilization trends in breast MRI. And from there, we realized that we had this powerful data set that gave us other, like all these different CPT codes. And we realized that it could help us examine other breast imaging modalities. And so MBI was kind of our natural next step. What really motivated us with seeing this gap between the demand for supplemental screening and actual patient access to it, we know that there are many women who have dense breasts, and those that at high risk need more than just mammography. Yet there are so many of them who face barriers to getting that additional imaging, and that's why MBI kind of stood out to us as a modality to worth investigating because it demonstrates strong performance in both screening and diagnostic settings with sensitivity and specificity comparable to MRI, and it's great for monitoring neoadjuvant therapy and has fewer contraindications and lower costs than MRI. Despite like all these benefits of MBI, to our knowledge, not a lot of studies have looked at MBI utilization and how it's being used, even though it's been popularized for the past like 20-ish years. So we kind of wanted to fill that gap and get a real world picture of its utilization.
And how do the results in your study differ by age groups?
Yeah, so when we broke it down, the results by age, we saw some really interesting patterns. For example, overall, all the age groups showed more decreased MBI utilization over the study period, but the degree of decline between each group varied a bit. So the youngest two age groups, so women ages 25 to 29 and ages 30 to 34, actually declined to no utilization by 2022, which isn't entirely surprising since routine breast screening isn't typically recommended until age 40. But beyond that, MBI also involves systemic radiation exposure through the radiotracer. Technetium, and we felt like that many young healthy women without a prior history of breast cancer would understandably be more hesitant to take on that additional radiation exposure. In contrast, women who have already diagnosed with breast cancer may be more willing to accept that trade off, given that the clinical benefit of MBI offers in staging, monitoring treatment response, and detecting additional disease. And then on the other end of the spectrum, women that are aged about 60 to 64 had the highest overall MBI utilization rate across the entire study period at 12.3 per 100 or 1,000 person years of observation. What particularly kind of stood out to us was women aged 45 to 49 had the single highest utilization rate of any age group in any given year, peaking at 15.1 per 1,000 persons years of observation in 2019. The age group also accounted for roughly 22% of all MBI performed during the study period, making it the most representative group as well. Overall, the data suggests that MBI use is mostly concentrated in the middle to older age ranges, which makes sense clinically given that breast cancer risk increases with age and that women in these groups may also have a more compelling reason to accept that radiation exposure associated with MBI.
Now, why, in your opinion, does this specialty or this modality rather face challenges in utilization?
Mhm. So there are a few key challenges that help explain why MBI remains underutilized despite its strong diagnostic performance. The first one, as I talked about or mentioned, is the whole concern about whole body radiation exposure. MBI involves a systemic radiotracer, and even with meaningful advances and dose reduction over the years, it still carries the highest whole body radiation dose of all the breast imaging modalities. And to kind of put it into perspective, the effective estimated dose is about 2.4 millisieverts compared to it being essentially zero for MRI and about zero point 0.5 for digital breast tomosynthesis or DBT. While that level is actually well below the average annual natural background radiation exposure in the United States, it's still a real barrier because in terms of both patient hesitation and physician willingness to recommend it, especially in younger, healthy women.
So it seems like the negative connotations are really stacking up, even though it does have some advantages, though, right?
Mhm. Yes. So some advantages that include having a higher specificity, having a same amount of sensitivity. It very much compares to MRI, but MBI is more affordable than breast MRI. The build cost for MBI is about $450, while to roughly $775, depending on the Medicare rate. And misspoke, where MBI is around $450
Hmm.
compared to for Medicare and MRI $775. So that like patients who need that supplemental screening but face those financial barriers to MRI, that difference is really meaningful. And MBI also has fewer contraindications to MRI, so it makes it more accessible to patients who have like contraindications to MRI and can't go undergo MRI, such as claustrophobia, renal disease. If you have like an implantable device that's not like compatible with MRI, or body habitus, you can't get an MRI. So really fills this like important niche for patients who are eligible for supplemental screening, but
Hmm.
for who MRI they can't go under MRI.
Right. Now, there seemed to be some stability in your study in MBI utilization, but then in 2022 it dropped. Why do you believe that was the case?
This is a really interesting question and something we gave a lot of thought to, because in 2022 we had about a 33% drop, and it's because utilization was like very stable in the years prior and then something clearly shifted. Um, the most obvious factor we believe is the COVID-19 pandemic. We knew screening utilization across virtually all imaging modalities dropped significantly during the pandemic. And while things were reopening in 2021, the effect on patient behavior and referral patterns don't really necessarily bounce overnight. So we believe by 2022, a lot of patients had fallen out of their routine screening habits. And for a modality like MBI that's already operating limitedly, that disruption probably hit a lot harder and recovered more slowly than widely available modalities. And beyond the pandemic, the other big reason is I think we believe that the rise of competing modalities, particularly contrast enhanced mammography or CEM, played a significant role. CEM also has a high diagnostic accuracy, and the radiation dose is a lot closer to a standard mammography and fewer contraindications. And critically, it can be implemented using existing mammography infrastructure. With MBI, you have to have a new machine just to complete MBI studies, while with CEM, you just software upgrade your existing mammography machine. And especially in 2022, when you think about it, it's particularly important year for CEM because that's when ACR, the American College of Radiology, published CEM specific BioRads lexicon. So it kind of gave radiologists a standardized reporting framework for CEM, and it's that kind of formal institution endorsement that was very impactful and signals to the radiology community that this CEM modality is mature, reliable, and ready for wider adoption. I feel MBI doesn't have that type or like guideline support, and I believe because of that, that disparity likely kind of accelerated the shift towards CEM instead of MBI.
So, with all that in mind, is it all doom and gloom for MBI, or do you think there are some real opportunities to grow its utilization?
I personally really do think there are some real actionable opportunities that can kind of give me genuine optimism about MBI's future. Something we've talked about is having the choice of MBI kind of also gives choices to the patients, and kind of having that conversation with your patients about what they're most comfortable with. And I think the most impactful change would come from when we have stronger support and endorsement from major recommending institutions like the ACR. And with firsthand, we've seen with CEM how much of a difference a formal lexicon and guideline endorsement can make with driving adoption. And MBI lacks that institutional backing. So I think building towards that should be a priority. And again, it doesn't happen in an instance. So it needs to be driven by evidence, which kind of brings me to my next point, where because there's not that much utilization of MBI, we need more robust research on MBI on several fronts. First, we need larger scale studies examining its efficacy in both screening and diagnostic settings. and that can help fill the evidence gap that is currently hindering guideline recommendations. But also continued research with dose reduction strategies is really important because it can be very meaningful if we were able to bring down the whole body radiation exposure associated with MBI. And third, when we started writing this paper, there wasn't any way for MBI to be used as a biopsy or to be correlated with biopsy system. If a patient underwent an MBI study, they'd probably have to also get a mammogram and an ultrasound if they needed something biopsied, because there was no way to correlate an MBI image to the biopsy system. However, as we finished the paper of recent, the MBI guided biopsy system has been commercially available. So research validating its performance and integrating it into clinical workflows is critical to demonstrate that, again, MBI can be used as a way for a standalone diagnostic pathway instead of just being one piece of a larger workup.
Now, are you or colleagues planning future research in this area?
I still think there's a lot of work to be done in this space. On the immediate front, we are continuing to use the market scan database. Our next focus is on investigating utilization trends of contrast enhanced mammography using the market scan database. So, giving everything we've discussed about CEM's growing adaptation and its infrastructure advantages over MBI, I think it's really important that we get that full picture of how CEM utilization is working with and kind of what we're going to do the same thing we've done with the MBI and MRI papers. Looking further ahead, one of the other questions that I'm really excited to explore is to see how MBI utilization looks like after the federal dense breast notification legislation that took effect in 2024, which now requires mammography facilities to notify patients whether or not they have dense breasts. So this landmark policy change kind of means that millions of these women didn't even know they had dense breasts. So now being informed, and now they need guidance of what supplemental screening options they have. So it'd be really fascinating to see if this increased awareness has translated into greater utilization of MBI, or whether patients and physicians continue to gravitate towards a more accessible alternative like CEM or MRI.
Yeah, we see reports all the time of, say, digital breast tomosynthesis or CEM or MRI being able to detect cancers in dense breasts very well. But what does the literature say about how MBI performs in this area?
Mm-hmm. So, MBI really does perform very similar to MRI in terms of diagnostic accuracy, with both in screening and diagnostic, as well as with monitoring neoadjuvant therapy when a patient's on chemotherapy. Beyond its accessibly, it also, if a patient has renal disease and isn't able to go through MRI or CEM, MBI is an option for them. Same thing if a patient's allergic to either the iodine contrast or the contrast in MRI, MBI would be a great option for them. So the literature really does state, and it's makes MBI a great safety net for those patients. It's a modality for patients that they can use when other preferred options are inaccessible or contraindicated. And for those patients, MBI could be a genuine, significant difference in their care.
Now, you graduate next year, correct?
Yes.
$1 million question. Any immediate plans after you get the degree?
Yes. It's exciting to see that after being in school for most of my life, that it feels like a really meaningful milestone that getting to apply for the 2026-2027 math cycle. So I'm hoping to apply to a diagnostic radiology residency spot, which I believe is a natural fit given the research I've been doing this past year and wanting to go into breast imaging. In terms of location, my hometown is in Kansas City, so staying really close to the Midwest is really important to me personally. And honestly, my experience with the radiology department here at WashU has really seriously made me consider trying to stay right here. So that would be great to stay at WashU or even in my hometown. But hopefully, wherever I end up taking this year for research has made me learn what a physician scientist is, and I would love to continue growing the project, research that I've started, and continue making new projects that kind of bridge the gap between health disparities of breast imaging. At the end of the day, my goal is to continue growing as a physician scientist and someone who can bridge that gap between rigorous research and meaningful patient care. I think this combination is so powerful because the best clinical decisions are really driven by strong evidence, and the most impactful research is driven by real patient need. And that's what's kind of driving me to become the type of physician I want to be.
Excellent. Well, any other thoughts today before I let you go?
Not particularly. Yeah, I think that's all.
Well, Ria, it's been great to talk to you, and best wishes on your studies and your work in the future. Should be very exciting.
Thank you.
That's all for today's show. Be sure to check out the Women's Imaging section on antmini.com for the latest news in research, policy, and practice management. And if you like this podcast series, you might also enjoy other series on the Ant Mini Podcast Network, including Keeping Up with the Radiologists, The Invisible Force, hosted by Tobias Gilk, and the Ultrasound Minicast, hosted by yours truly. We thank you for visiting antmini.com and hope to have your continued support. Until next time.